Just wait for the other two to come in. And there we go. So it's been a morning as per normal of gremlins, but here we are, Lindsay from Freedom Media in the studio. You can see Dr. Mark Lofts. Thank you,
yes,
Dr. Mark, coming in. Look, there has been recently, Dr. Kerryn Phelps has released a submission for the federal parliamentary inquiry into long COVID. Now, I know by now that came out on the 28th of December. There has been much talk around that. There has been a couple of mainstream media, two in fact, one on Channel 9, one on Sky, on the 28th of December, talking about her parliamentary submission. In this stream, we're going to take a deep dive, as I say, into some of the points that she raises in the submission. Hence the reason why we have Dr. Mark with his expertise that I guess can help enable us to interpret the points that she's trying to make and hopefully explain what that really means for the ordinary person. So I think on that basis, so what I've done is I've got together the two mainstream media clips and I've put the key points to that. So I think to kick off on this stream, let's take a look at that.
Let's move on to a bombshell story. Former federal MP Kerryn Phelps has revealed in a submission to a parliamentary inquiry on long COVID that she and her wife both suffered from injury as a result of getting the COVID vaccine. And she claims the true number of people who have had the same sort of side effects is much more than has been reported.
Well, in Jackie's case, we obviously did a lot of homework about the vaccines and went along to have the vaccines done because we believed that on the balance of risks and benefits that was the best thing to do. And within minutes of having the vaccine, she had a quite severe reaction with numbness of her hands and feet, tingling all over her body, her head feeling like it was going to explode, pain, and then over the weeks and months following that, the condition continued, and she'd seen a number of specialists, and the conclusion was that she had an injury related to the vaccine, and so that was in her case. I went back and had the second vaccine, thinking that it's a rare reaction, and again on the balance of risks and benefits, and in my case I developed a reaction where my blood pressure, my pulse rate and my temperature was going up and down all over the place, and with some quite distressing symptoms and persisting for quite some time and over a period of many months, and I was diagnosed with a vaccine-related dysautonomia. So over the process of the last, year and a half or so, I've also spoken to a number of colleagues who've had vaccine adverse events themselves, patients who've had vaccine adverse events, and so when I was putting in the submission to the long COVID and reinfection inquiry for the Australian Parliament just in the last month or so, I included the group of people who have suffered adverse events from vaccination.
This is huge, Bronwyn, and for too long it's almost been forbidden to say this or even report it.
Really, you're so right. And I was in a conversation about reactions about this today. And one of those reactions was with a second vaccination, lymph glands under the arm could come up like symptoms of breast cancer. And there are reported incidents of women having had biopsies as a result of this because the commonality of this reaction was not reported anywhere.
These are serious side effects. Why did the medical regulator, AHPRA, warn doctors then, as you claim, not to speak out about these vaccine side effects?
We'd have to ask AHPRA themselves about their motivation.
There seems to be a mantra that comes out that it's all okay if it's a very low percentage who suffer, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter.
But certainly quite a number of doctors that I've spoken to have felt impeded in speaking out about their concerns about vaccine adverse events because of the statement made by AHPRA that doctors shouldn't say anything that was going to impede the government's vaccine rollout. And they took that to mean not to publicly raise their concerns.
And that really you have no recourse against the developers of those vaccines because it was deemed, because of the pandemic, that you would simply not do all the sort of testing you would normally do. But conversation and comparing statistics, as Kerryn Phelps is pointing out in her submission, was vitally important, and yet it was stamped on. It was heresy. You weren't allowed to mention it after the torture.
No, you were some sort of conspiracy theorist.
So there we go. And so that's a package of Sky News and Channel 9 of the key points. We are going to take a closer look at that. I'm just going to say before we push on, we have noticed in previous streams, and including this one, comments about the low volume. I guess thanks to the technical expertise, Clayton, who's actually producing this stream now behind the scenes. But we've established if you have a Samsung Galaxy, an old model phone, or say a model A2021, I think it was, or 7071, if that's correct, Clayton, that there could be an issue with the software with the phone from your YouTube, what version you're using, as to how that may impact on the sound. So Clayton's done a deep dive into that particular issue. There is nothing that we can do this end to solve that. I don't want to say update your software on your phone. That's your call and your choice to do. But anybody else that seems not to be on it seems to be particularly related to Samsung. So here we go. And I'm just going to ask Clayton if you can bring up the laptop. And I'm going to just say, so first off, Dr. Kerryn Phelps, her parliamentary submission, I'm just going to talk you through here. This is the WA Government Parliament website. And you can see if you look over here and you click on submissions, it will take you to this page here. Dr. Kerryn Phelps, her submission is number 510, as you can see here where I'm moving on the mouse, of that particular submission. It's a 19-page submission, and she goes in and she opens from the outset, and she says that she's making this as a private citizen. So that's one thing that I think, in fairness to Dr. Kerryn Phelps, she is making this as a private citizen, yet on mainstream media, she's talking as a health professional in a professional capacity, talking about her private experiences. So I think there is a connection that can be made there. And but here you go. This is just a quick look of the particular submission. And thank you, Clayton, for that. We'll but here you go. This is just a quick look of the particular key points that that we've been through. Dr. Kerryn Phelps with yourself, Dr. Mark. I should say it's Dr. Lofts, but ever since I've known and Dr. Mark, I've always just referred to him as Dr. Mark. So I apologise for that. It's an old habit. There's 5 key points that that you're looking to expand on, and what we're going to do is we're going to get straight into the first one. We're going to put it up on the screen, and we're going to talk you through the first point, and then we'll come through each of those 5 points. We will be monitoring your comments as we go through the stream, and hopefully we can have a little bit of interaction between. And if you have a question, pop it in the comment. We have the experience of Dr. Mark Lofts. Those that have known and seen, heard him speak at many of the rallies in Perth. This is a fantastic opportunity to tap in the mind, and what a brilliant mind it is. That I must say, I've had the opportunity to head up north, down south, do a few hours, many hours in a plane and a car, and just the range of, it's an honour and privilege is what I can say. But here we go. If we can go, discussion point number 1.
Research into the potential and known effects, causes, risk factors, prevalence, management and treatment of long COVID and or repeated COVID infections in Australia.
Okay. a short point. And I guess, so when she's saying the research into, do you think she's talking about the need for more or the lack of?
Well, she's complaining about both. She knows we need more research, and she's complaining, of course, that we haven't done enough research so far. But I wanted to emphasise at that point that her submission was mainly dealing with the treatment of so-called long COVID and repeated COVID infections, and she was not dealing in this point with the vaccine questions. So although she put in a big complaint about vaccines, her basic thrust in this submission, which closed on 18th of November, that's clearly with the latest time when she submitted it, this was mainly directed at long COVID rather than the question of vaccines. But because, as she has explained, she and her partner have both been so badly damaged, she had to include the vaccine issue as well. If we look at her later interview, which I believe is from the 28th of December,
Correct.
which is about
Yes.
a month after these submissions, she is clearly turning more and more critical about the issue of vaccination because she and her partner have both been badly damaged by it. I think many readers, many listeners may be unaware of one of the terms here, the term dysautonomia.
Okay, she mentioned that in her
That's
cross
right.
to Channel 9, yes?
And in the term dysautonomia means dysfunction of the sympathetic nervous system. And when you get that, as she described, you get drops and rises in blood pressure, so you tend to fall over, your heart races and then becomes very slow. And these are real signs of sympathetic nerve damage being caused by having these vaccines. But the real problem is what happens later on in life. If you have this sympathetic nerve damage and you keep getting these vaccines, the problem will get worse and worse. And I should point out that dysautonomia has a lot of other more terrible features than that. There's many people who are diabetics and those who are pre-diabetics who want to listen to this. What happens with diabetes when you get dysautonomia? And we have no evidence that this is not going to happen for people who've had these jabs if they live a few years longer. With dysautonomia, of severe dysautonomia with diabetes, you get a terrible symptom called nocturnal diarrhea. In other words, you're asleep in bed and your bowels suddenly dysfunction and you mess the bed. It makes life absolutely dreadful for people. So we should not be playing around with any vaccines that give people sympathetic dysautonomia, or as she said, they called it a vaccine-related dysautonomia. This is a real red flag, and I think perhaps that Kerryn Phelps has only slowly come to this realisation since she's been hit by conflicted material, all the get the jab stuff, COVID's a terrible disease on one side, and her own practical experience, plus what she's seen as a GP among the vax-injured.
So I guess one question that comes to mind with that, Dr. Mark, is you may find, based on what you've said, if I'm understanding this correctly, that there are some people that may not have any other side effect or adverse side effect as a result of the vaccine to date, but they may be experiencing or had a bout of nocturnal diarrhea.
They probably haven't been alive long enough for that, because what I'm warning about is that repeated jabs will cause hidden disease, which
Right.
would then come out much later on. But I'm so shocked at the postural hypotension and tachycardia associated with this vaccine-related dysautonomia that we're moving into a totally new field. We don't know what's going to happen to the people who've been given these COVID jabs in 5 years. I mean, many people listening here won't want to hear it because it's such a terrible story, but you don't want to end up well, not a bedridden cripple, but a person who constantly has to deal with housework, cleaning up the mess that you're going to get from sympathetic dysautonomia.
It's just the mind boggles really. It really does. We can see the comments coming through. Thank you very much. Some people, some friends of the show. Lucy, I'm just going to do a special call out there. A long time ago, talking about saying, thank you, Dr. Mark, for speaking out. But also a person, when I put a call out for the studios here at Freedom Media on day one, came here when it was an absolute dust bowl and spent quite a few hours helping sort this studio out. So you know who you are. I'm just going to say thank you very much in terms of the comment. Look, I just want to paint a little bit of the timeline. You've mentioned that the media articles which you've seen were released to air on the 28th of December. Dr. Kerryn Phelps' submission was submitted on the 18th of December. The Parliamentary Federal Inquiry closed on the 22nd of December 2022, just gone. Now, the question has arisen, and I've certainly been watching the comments on socials and things, why is she speaking out now? I can tell you that in relation to the parliamentary submission, when you make a submission to a parliamentary inquiry of not only long COVID, but any parliamentary inquiry, you're bound by strict guidelines that if you talk publicly about your submission before it's actually published on the parliamentary government website, which I showed you earlier, then they will redact your submission. So I guess due to no fault of her own, in terms of the submission, that is hopefully an explanation that people may understand as to why she hasn't spoken about her submission until after the federal government published it on the website on the 22nd of December. In terms of timelines, in the submission, and Dr. Mark has a copy of the submission here, it is 19 pages as I said, she mentions in there that she first became aware of the adverse reactions back to July 2021. Now, there will be an argument and comments will come in and say, why didn't she make public admissions there? And this stream is not so much to look at that, because you can speculate as to why. I guess it's the importance of knowing what's in this submission, and that we want to get into. And I'm just going to say, coming back to the video, she mentions one thing, I guess, I'm going to use the term disappointed. I'm disappointed to hear her say, when asked the question by Channel 9, why APRA, why it was that APRA potentially stopped doctors from speaking. And she said, I don't really know about that, and you need to go and ask APRA. Well, in her submission, she refers to the direction that APRA have given to doctors, and it's clear. It's very clear in that direction which came out. I first saw that back in February 2020, and I saw that APRA direction firsthand. I actually saw it from practicing doctors. I was within or working within that environment in the hospital setting, and I saw this come out. When of course I went to get a copy of it, I couldn't. But it's very clear what that direction says. APRA, make no mistake about it, said if you go against the government narrative, they're not deregistering, as on a previous stream with Dr. Duncan Symes, and he set the record straight with that. They're suspending doctors. That's how they're getting around that. And of course, many will know the story of Dr. William Bay, who recently is taking on the decision for APRA to suspend him, and that is set off to a Supreme Court hearing, and so far he's kicking goals. He's kicking goals with that. But I guess I'm trying to pick up on some of the comments that you're saying there. We're going to move on to the next point, the discussion point number 2. We'll play you that package, and then we'll come back for more comments.
The World Health Organization has estimated that between 10 and 20% of COVID-19 survivors will be left with lasting symptoms such as extreme exhaustion, cognitive impairment, breathlessness, palpitations, and more. Current research suggests approximately 1 in 8 people who get COVID-19 go on to develop long COVID, post-infection symptoms lasting for at least a month. It may be seen referred to as post-COVID syndrome, where symptoms persist beyond 12 weeks. The terms long COVID and post-COVID syndrome are sometimes used interchangeably.
So there we go. We're talking, as we've seen from, we're just going to take out the earpiece so it doesn't reverb. Dr. Mark, I guess over to yourself in terms of
Yes.
what do you think the point is, or the significance of her including that in her submission?
Well, this was vital for her to include because, as we saw in the first quote, that her submission was mainly about the question of long COVID. If we're to believe what the World Health Organization is telling us, we are to believe that over 10% of the population is going to be badly affected by having this COVID infection. I'd first like to point out that this COVID-19 infection is merely another kind of flu. We've always had flu every year since as far as people could measure it, but all the cases of flu all over the world suddenly disappeared last year, the year before, and they were replaced by COVID. Now, of course, we're getting flu coming back. We're having different brands of COVID coming in, according to Norman Swan and all these other clever people who keep talking on the radio about it. But the point is, we have no proof that the COVID is going to cause severe chronic damage in people who get this long COVID syndrome or post-COVID syndrome. Firstly, I'd like to mention that since COVID is a type of flu, flu does have side effects. It can cause, particularly in old people, severe chest infection. It can cause secondary infections and very often death. I mean, even as a child aged 6, before I ever thought of doing medicine, the general teaching was that flu only kills older people. And so we all have to die of something. It's part of our human mortality. And flu and colds and dying of a chest infection, they used to call it the old men's friend, because people have to die of something, and often it's the best way to die. And that's why we're getting all these false manufactured statistics, but we'll go into that. So what she's worried about is the people being left with long-lasting damage and symptoms. But of course this has been played up in order to force people to get these toxic jabs that they call COVID vaccinations. Now, Kerryn Phelps, I should point out, she was the head of the Australian Medical Association, and she was always very prominent and very important in everything she said. But I must admit I was quite hostile to her before, because she was always telling people to get the jab, and that the doctors and academics and the World Health Organization all knew what was right. And I'd only like to point out that now that she's come to reality, it's going to take her quite a while to get through all the mess and BS she has learnt at medical school and learnt in association with specialist colleagues. In that sense, she's in exactly the same position as me. She went to Sydney University at medical school. So did I. I was 2 years ahead of her. I never saw her there, so there's no connection between us. But what she has seen and what I've experienced would be very similar in terms of our education. I mean, the very first lecture we had in first year of medical school was by Dr. Dampney, teaching us biomathematics, and I imagine that Dr. Kerryn Phelps had the same thing. But what we learnt was fairly straightforward statistics. We weren't learning all this mathematical modelling stuff, but I'll come back to that a bit later. So what's basically been going on here is a scare campaign to tell people to get the jab and to manipulate the whole population to do so. See, Kerryn Phelps would only have to look a little way into history and what's been done with the Bill Gates Foundation, etc., to see that this is a worldwide plan to get everyone jabbed so that there is no control group to test for possible vaccine damage. That's been the big attempt.
Right.
They want everyone jabbed and they don't want a control group, because this is malfeasance on a large scale. These vaccines were untested, and we, including poor Kerryn Phelps and her partner, are the lab rats who were being attacked, and it is going to take Dr. Kerryn Phelps a while to get this through her mind so she can see whose side she's really on.
And I guess that would come back to twofold for her. It's a double-edged sword. She has the clinical knowledge and experience to know some of the conditions that she certainly felt in the initial stages that she was exhibiting. Certainly for her partner, in her submission, she talks about with her partner Jackie had her second jab in hospital because they felt that the risk of anaphylaxis was great. So Dr. Kerryn Phelps, with 2 specialists that she was able to, she understands the risk. She was present during that particular administration of her partner Jackie, her wife's second vaccination, which and it's quoted in here that Jackie said, "I can't feel my legs are feeling numb," and Dr. Kerryn Phelps and Jackie were saying, making it very clear that we are experiencing, or she's experiencing conditions, but the nursing staff and so on said, "You're fine, you're free to go home." So I guess whilst the question is not so much why she hasn't spoken out beforehand. The question is, she's dealing with it. A, she has the clinical knowledge, and B, she's experiencing these symptoms herself and her wife, her partner, of a number of years, many years. I think it was, they went to New York to actually get legally married because it's the only place that they could do, 1985 or something of that date. Her partner, she's watching her partner before her very eyes with very significant injuries, and she understands the medical consequences of those injuries. So Dr. Mark.
Yeah, so you brought up an important point that I didn't realise that her partner Jackie had a second jab and specialists were present. You brought up many important points. Firstly, she quotes the World Health Organization as if they're an authoritative organisation. Now, because she's been at Sydney University like myself, she's probably experienced many of the people that I went through with and what has happened there. But the World Health Organization is the promoter of a lot of this corruption. As a person who worked there called Astrid Stickelberger saw, the World Health Organization has been taken over by numerous corrupt people, and they're peddling this jab the whole world's population agenda. And then I looked at somebody I knew was particularly obnoxious in medical school, and I thought, wonder where he might be here, and I found that he's running the World Health Organization at Sydney University, at least in a remote role. I would call him a professor of considerable demerit, but if Kerryn Phelps cares to look, she'll see a lot of these evil arrows, the World Health Organizations, are being fired by him. So if she looks under the heap of vegetables, she'll find the person. She probably knows them already. And if I was going to advise Kerryn Phelps to look at someone, I'd look at his attitude, his state of mind, and the nature of his reassurances as to her condition. But that'll be up to her to see. More important is the question of specialists. Kerryn Phelps is a general practitioner. She's not a medical specialist of any sort. Now, general practitioners have to deal with all sorts of problems, and so often they get out of depth, so they have to hand the patient over to a specialist, which is a correct and wise thing to do. But I wanted to do physician training. I have only an MBBS, but when I wanted to go into specialties, I got into immunology, and I found it the most disgusting experience I had ever had. And the corruption of the people truly shocked me. So I never ever thought I'd ever be coming out and speaking publicly. I don't have to mention them by name, but I never thought I'd be coming out to speak publicly about the corruption in immunology. I was working there in 1986, and the young immunologist there, 8 years older than me, when it suddenly occurred to me that perhaps vaccines and the increasing use was causing all the increase in autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, celiac disease, Crohn's disease, etc. When I made that connection, he told me, Mark, that is absolutely wrong. Vaccines have been tested and they've been found to be entirely safe. And lo and behold, Judy Weilerman comes forth and demonstrates that these tests for vaccine safety have never ever been done. And her book came out just before the COVID scam hit, and so she's exposed all this major corruption in medicine. So now let me go into the specialist problem. There's what's called the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. Physicians, what Americans would call internists. They're people who diagnose complicated diseases and treat them with drugs. And they're divided into many other subspecialties: cardiologists, neurologists, infectious disease specialists, immunologists, rheumatologists, gastroenterologists, and even subsets of those, such as hepatologists. So you've got a whole lot of specialists who are grouped into one major organisation, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. I have not seen a single media issue about COVID from the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. I am certain that many of them know that this is a scam, but the problem is that they are conflicted because so many of them are presumably in the pay of Big Pharma, which now controls medical education. And I know for a fact that people in immunology, at least the ones in Western Australia where I was doing it, were corrupt, and I have no reason to think it wasn't very similar otherwise. But I'm not saying that all immunologists are corrupt. You've got people like Dolores Cale in Ireland who are certainly standing up against this COVID scam. You've got people like Judy Mikovits and David Martin who'd already realised the medical malfeasance going on with the gain-of-function research being encouraged by Anthony Fauci, and when it got too hot to handle in the USA, they sent it to the Wuhan laboratory in China. And I've only recently found the CSIRO has also been trading many materials with the Wuhan laboratory. So it's an international issue that we're dealing with. But the problem is that when you have this assembly of different specialists together, each of the specialties has an obvious veto over the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. The question of COVID is a question of infectious disease and of immunology. Thus, the infectious disease specialists, the virologists in particular, and the immunologists are going to say all this vaccine issue, all this COVID issue is quite legitimate. We have to start jabbing the people, so that all the other specialists like cardiologists, neurologists and gastroenterologists just have to defer to them. And that's leading, as well as also the pharmacy, big pharma corruption, and that has led to the Royal Australasian College of Physicians shutting up about the issue when they should really be stepping up to save the millions of Australians and their children who are going to be jabbed. And we can already see the side effects emerging everywhere. And I think that Kerryn Phelps has seen it even more than I have, because it's struck right home to her and her family, as well as what she hears from GPs.
I think I'm just going to pick up on a comment here. Terry's talking about saying his comment is in 20 years' time, these poor people will be thinking that the disease that they actually have is from old age.
That's right. Now, that's right. We do get old age, we do get problems. And when it has hit someone in more advanced age, like, say, Kerryn Phelps or Jackie or myself, it is going to add to the problems you've got with old age. But that's what this immune damage is doing from the jabs. It's making your immune system age faster than it would otherwise. People given the Pfizer vaccine after they've had 2 doses, especially with the 3rd dose, they get a change in their immunoglobulin profile. You have these things called immunoglobulins, and they're in different categories. And one of the categories is called immunoglobulin G4, IgG4. And after you've had more than 2 jabs of Pfizer, the IgG4 goes up. Now, IgG4, unlike the other immunoglobulin categories, IgG4 is an immune suppressant, and it particularly opposes another immune class group called IgE. They're the immune category that's associated with fighting parasitic disease. And so when you start raising the level of IgG4, it interferes with the other IgGs as well as the IgE and causes a general immune system suppression. And the horrifying thing that they've found is that this IgG4, this suppressing antibody, serves to protect the muck that's been injected into you from the COVID jab. And the particular muck I'm talking about is the spike protein, which brings up a whole new subject, which I'll have to discuss there. The spike protein from COVID and other forms of flu is a special protein designed, well, almost designed for the virus, so it can burrow into your cells, put its RNA in, get the RNA transcribed back into DNA, and it turns your cell into a virus factory. That's why you get sick. But the problem is that the spike protein is the principal product they've been working on with these COVID jabs. One of these types is what's called mRNA for the spike protein. And this mRNA for the spike protein is being jabbed into people. And this mRNA, because it comes in little liposomes, gets into the cells and it gets into your DNA, and thus that mRNA of the spike protein is back transcribed into your DNA, and it becomes a source for your body cells to start producing it as a normal protein product in your body. And the raised IgG4 serves to suppress your body's normal response to spike protein. Now, the spike protein is very toxic. It makes people feel very sick. People who've received the Novavax, which is an augmented, a strengthened version of the spike protein, they're having terrible reactions too. They're not getting the RNA of the spike protein, they're not getting the template to produce it, but the spike protein they get injected with the Novavax is so toxic it's causing people to have a different suite of symptoms. And worse still, many people are getting multiple jabs. They get Pfizer, then they get Novavax, and you don't know where you stand with studying them.
I guess one of the things I just want to thrash out this concept, and it's in preparing for this stream, we met on Sunday, and we had a conversation. In fact, it was a three-way conversation. We were talking with Norm, who's also part of the team. He's here behind the scenes helping get this stream out as well. And we were talking about the change going back early years I mean, how is it that the doctors are almost in unison? I mean, were they directed to say what they're saying in terms of the safe and efficacy part of the vaccine? Or is it simply just the way that medicine has changed the way that doctors' practice is? One of the issues we spoke about is doctors now, they bulk bill in 6-minute consultations, whereas, in your day, it wasn't, that wasn't the case. And we're talking about, I guess, Dr. Mark, can you confirm that when a new medicine came to market, what did you do back then that you think is not happening now?
Well, back then, the big pharma didn't own everything. There were government testing laboratories, and they'd allow the new antibiotic, whatever, to go out to a few GPs, etc., and they could then report back on it. So we had safety standards when new medications were released. All of these have been totally overthrown with the coming of COVID. They said it was such a terrible emergency, they brought in an emergency decree, and they brought in other laws, such as Proposition 158 here, which I believe is now Proposition 184 and 185, that says that an authorised officer can get police to hold you down and you can be forcibly jabbed, including removing your underwear to do so. This is a violation of human rights, and Kerryn Phelps may not be aware of this because she's in New South Wales.
So, Dr. Mark, do you think, the issue, do you think doctors have the time to actually go and read peer-reviewed journal papers, scientific papers about the vaccine, looking at the trials and so on and so forth? Do they have that, or are they just getting? What are they basing today? What are doctors basing their information on?
Well, that's right. They're basing it on what they call expert opinion. For a doctor to go and read up about vaccines would take a terrible long time. We're not even taught properly about vaccine manufacture at medical school. That's classed as pharmacology, a specialist subject on its own that medicine only attaches to when looking at the side effects that these drugs can give. But the formation of vaccines has gone back to about 1770, a bit before that, a bit before the time Australia was colonised. And since that time, vaccines have been a very specialised subject, and a lot of claims have been made for how good they are. But the problem is, while I can agree that vaccine for yellow fever or for rabies would be good, because you pretty well got a 100% chance of dying if you get those two conditions, giving vaccines for things like measles and mumps and ordinary flu are not a good idea, because you've already seen that of hemorrhagic dengue fever. People who get a vaccine for dengue fever, they're more likely to get hemorrhagic dengue the next time they get an attack of dengue fever. So there are many contraindications to the use of vaccines now.
So I'm going to pick up on a comment that's just come forward. So just sort of expanding on that, and bearing in mind that we have 5 points, we've covered 2, we've got 3 more to go. But there is a comment here that's just saying then, okay, so we know now that doctors don't have the time to look at medications, vaccines, and so on and so forth. What about a doctor who's actually now aware of what's going on? how do they diagnose patients with the knowledge that they understand what's at play here?
Well, I think,
in your opinion,
in my opinion, I think what they do now, they realise that the proper treatment is not what the government is telling them. So if a patient comes in with flu-like symptoms that they'd like you to call COVID, and they did themselves one of these RATS tests and it was positive, the doctor really has to assess the person for how severe they are, call the disease a flu, not call it COVID, and give the person the proper medical treatment. And I'd like to bring up this medical treatment question. Kerryn Phelps, in her submission, where she does talk about the vaccines and the damage they cause, she suggests that the treatment should be antiviral medications, things like antiretroviral medications that are used in AIDS, HIV infection, etc. These are very costly and they have varied side effects. Now, often, of course, a specialist will ridicule a GP for not knowing very much. But I'd like to point out that some GPs have found new therapies. And I'd point out about Dr. Vladimir Zelenko from upstate New York. He had to face a lot of very elderly, very sick people with what they were calling COVID, which was just merely a severe type of flu, or it may have been one specially released in the area with gain of function. So he had these very sick people, and he pioneered the combination of ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, quercetin, vitamin D and C, and zinc. And he found that that worked. Many very elderly people in their 80s got over it and walked out of bed, and he had wonderful results. He told Donald Trump of that. Donald Trump publicised his results. Then Donald Trump was got at by Fauci and the medical authorities.
Yeah, it was taken out of context because he made a comment about bleach as well, and the mainstream media portrayed it that Trump was saying, you know, gargle bleach and it's going to kill the virus, which is not what was said.
That's right, and I have to emphasise Vladimir Zelenko has the correct treatment. And if Kerryn Phelps wants to know, she should look at what Vladimir Zelenko found and try that. But she's also going to find that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine have been restricted, and if a doctor in Queensland prescribes hydroxychloroquine for anything other than what it's supposedly recommended for, like arthritis, etc., he will be struck off.
And that is on the back of recent new legislation that was introduced into Queensland.
That's right.
And, you know, God forbid that it doesn't come in nationally, because it really is going to hamstring doctors even more so.
That's right.
And we all know, you know, just mentioning the word ivermectin, you know, certainly on this, I mean, I copped a number of bans, you know, for doing that, but the tide has changed. There is more conversation coming around it. It's a question of, you know, how much longer can they keep the lid on? They're certainly trying.
Right.
I think, Dr. Mark, what we might do is we might move on to point number 3.
Yes.
And so we'll play that one now, if we can.
With reduced access to PCR testing and the abandonment of mandatory reporting of rapid antigen testing, accurate data on COVID infections will be even less reliable, and collection of data on COVID even more challenging. The other barrier to diagnosis of long COVID is the current lack of any definitive diagnostic tests.
Right, so I guess in that particular point, you know, it ends talking about the lack of diagnostic tools, and I guess, I mean, you know, as a layman, I don't know, you could ask yourself, there's been a number of subvariants that have come out. We're now hearing about, I think they're up to Kraken is the current one, but we haven't heard, I mean, it's still the same PCR test.
Sure.
It's still the same rapid antigen test. What do you think? Where do you think she's coming from in relation to?
Yes, she's coming from the idea that the general testing, that the PCR, the RATS tests, and the doctors researching it are doing it honestly, and they're trying to work out the problem. I think she's starting to realise that they're not doing so, that they're being instructed from above. AHPRA the Australian Health Professionals Regulatory Authority, AHPRA, I believe doesn't even have a doctor on it. The doctors are being dictated to by a bunch of big pharma paid bureaucrats, which is, as far as I can tell, is a private organisation that advises the government.
Yeah.
So our government is losing sovereignty and control as it won't appoint proper independent experts. And I think Dr. Kerryn Phelps is only gradually coming to that realisation that we have an orchestrated litany of lies in different institutions, not just in government but private enterprise, which are controlling medical knowledge and information. And I'd like to point out that specialists nowadays, the specialist hasn't got time to go and look in all the various journals to find out about his specialty. What he does instead, he looks up a thing called Up to Date. And in Up to Date, it has digests of the various journals made by paid medical specialists. But the problem is that these paid medical specialists are employed by the drug companies, and they're specifically employed to peddle the new drug company's new drug. And because the drugs are new, we don't know about their side effects, and so the doctors, the specialist doctors, get a biased presentation from another specialist. We already know this is a mess, and I think Dr. Kerryn Phelps knows that too, because of the Vioxx scandal, where about 40,000 people in the USA got heart attacks because of the use of Vioxx. Even though they knew that Vioxx tended to cause coagulation and heart attacks, the drug companies managed to suppress it, and the poor GPs and specialists were prescribing the Vioxx blind. They didn't realise the side effects. They weren't told.
Yeah, I've always said, I mean, you know, to look for the answers, I mean, history has the answers, and you look at, I mean, not just medications, vaccines and things like that, you know, look at what the tobacco industry did.
Oh, yes.
I mean, they actually paid, we now know, they paid doctors to smoke on ads and promote smoking as a health, you know, potential, you know, health benefit.
That's right, now, and that was done in the 1950s, and actually the first association between lung cancer and smoking was made in Germany in the 1930s, but nobody listened to it, calling them a bunch of Nazis. Then America eventually found the same thing themselves.
One of the comments that's coming through, and I think this is, you know, this is a conversation we haven't even scratched on this particular point here, and this is a comment, I won't say their name, but they're just asking, you know, that they, well, I'm now seeing it on both sides of the river. Perth, you're either north of the river or south of the river, but people are screaming out, where can they find a good doctor? And I guess if you look at those comments, when I see that, I'm meaning good doctor. That's you know, doctors to get to GPs, they're you know, they've got the experience, they've got the expertise, and so on and so forth. I guess what the word good means, perhaps a doctor who, will we get that? A doctor who is not indoctrinated, or a doctor who doesn't fear? One of the reasons, Dr. Mark, you've been vocal from the outset and you continue to speak out is because you're retired.
Oh, that's right. I have nobody telling me what to do.
So APRA can't touch you.
That's right.
So, and you've mentioned this, I know, at a number of rallies and talking about particularly young doctors now. I mean, you know, UWA here for what, it's an 8-year degree.
That's right.
You're looking, coming out from day one with a HECS debt in the order of $100,000 plus. So you have all these life pressures that doctors, you know, back in
my day didn't have. I mean, I was the first cohort who went to Sydney University, didn't have to pay any fees.
So I guess, you know, it's, and you could say a good doctor, a specialist doctor in private practice might be earning, you know, north of, you know, $250, $300, $400, you know, $1,000 or and some, I guess. But we really, you know, don't know and understand. I mean, it is a case of the Smith versus the Jones, but just because they're earning that on paper doesn't mean that, you know, they're still not struggling with the cost of living pressures that everybody else is. So they've got a very important decision to make in order to really just put basic food on the table.
Well, that's
now, I'm
right.
not saying as an excuse, by no means am I saying, because the Hippocratic Oath and, you know, do no harm to a patient should be paramount.
That's right.
Should be.
As they say in Latin, primum non nocere. Don't do things that will injure the patient. And that's
Right.
what we're doing with the vaccines. That basic principle has been ignored entirely.
And I think one of the things, I mean, based on that as well, don't do things that will injure the patient. And it's not one of the points, but it's something that I'm just going to raise here. So from the very outset, we had Scott Morrison and the then Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt coming out saying, of course, we know Big Pharma were offered total indemnity from prosecution of the vaccine.
That's right.
Greg Hunt and Scott Morrison said, don't worry, doctors, the Australian federal government has your back, in essence, and we are going to come up with an indemnification scheme that we're going to put out to doctors. Now, I recall this distinctly about 18 months ago, and there was a big call for that, what that looked like, what that actually looked like. It's a bit like now the voice to Parliament. Anthony Albanese wants us to vote yes on the referendum, but when asked the question of what does the legislation coming in behind that look like, well, he's going to tell us down the track. We now know, and I think this broke about 2 months ago, that that doctors don't have the indemnity.
That's right.
That the federal government haven't put a place to back up the GPs. They don't have their backs.
That's right. Unfortunately, it's a lot more cynical than that. A doctor in private practice, not in group practice, a doctor in private practice is given $80 by the government to give the jab. And if you've got a practice of, say, 1,000 people, you get 800 to follow that line.
Yeah.
And if the government's offering a jab to people every 3 months, put the maths together, that's $250,000. And if you're a struggling GP trying to pay an ex-partner with a child, etc., you'll just fall for that, or a specialist, you'll just fall for that sort of thing, that extra
Wow.
money.
You know, that's a different type of pressures, and, comment coming in saying that their doctor that they're seeing is still in denial. They're still lying to themselves, and
That's
also
right.
to their patients. But I guess this submission is giving them, this is what we're talking about, and I've mentioned this already, that perhaps it's no quarter given, no amnesty shall be given either. At some point the tide needs to turn, but we can perhaps understand in the mind of the doctor that maybe they have these underlying health issues, that they have more knowledge about what it means to them, and it's that dilemma, which is, I think, what you're alluding to with Dr. Kerryn Phelps that they're looking at. So I think I'm just trying to pick up on some of the comments as we go. And if I can, sorry, Norm, just ask, we're up to discussion point number 4. Thank you for that. So discussion point number 4, we'll take a look at that.
Many of my colleagues warned about an over-reliance on a vaccines-only strategy when it became apparent that high levels of vaccinations were not going to be sufficient to contain the pandemic or prevent long-term damage. I was also deeply concerned about the as-yet unknown future impact on children exposed to the repeated infection with neurotropic virus in their early developmental years.
So there we go. And so before we get into it, I'm just going to, because they have gone to the effort, they've mentioned this a couple of times, Ben, who brought the bill back to Section 158, which was discussed, I think more people in the last 2 years on the streets of Perth have learnt more about the way Parliament works and legislation that was snuck in under the dark of night than ever before. So short answer, Premier Colin Barnett introduced Section 158 into the Public Health Act here in Western Australia back in 2016.
That's right. It's
And,
a case of bipartisan BS.
Yeah, so I guess, they're handing the baton over. They're absolutely handing the baton over. So it's just confirming what's actually going on. Discussion point number 4.
Yes, especially her second comment here, being deeply concerned about the impact of children exposed to repeated infection with a neurotropic virus. Well, children and the Australopithecine ancestors of human beings, we've had to deal with this for millions of years. We've had all these viruses around, and we have to weigh that against the effect of vaccines and the beneficial effect of these wonderful things that Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, a GP, pioneered on very sick elderly patients in upstate New York. And she's deeply concerned about future impact on children of these viruses, but we must remember that it's old people, not children, that die of flu. And I just hope that Dr. Kerryn Phelps stands by someone like Dr. Vladimir Selenko, because she has to understand not to be bullied by specialists. I mean, a poor partner has a second jab of this COVID vaccine mug in the presence of specialists, and from what you said, they sent her home even though she was feeling numb.
So in essence, she's been subjected to the bullying and the life of, she has the empathy of the ordinary person. Things that many stories coming out, even here at Freedom Media, you know, people saying this has been their experience. They're going into a hospital, significant chest pain, and being told everything's okay. So she's now witnessing this. It's an unfortunate dilemma that she finds herself in, and you don't want to say let's hope that more come out, because that means more people
are going to get sick,
are finding themselves in the same situation. She mentions in her submission the reliance on a vaccine only, and you've mentioned that with some of the antivirals. In discussion point number 3. I am just going to come back to that. So we now know, I guess, via press conferences and so on and so forth, that there is an impact. We're seeing the vaccine-only impact, and I find it interesting, and I hadn't considered that until now that you mentioned the reason why they want everybody jabbed is because then they have no benchmark to compare as what is an injury and what's not, because it could just be, who knows, electronic, magnetic radiation from mobile phones or whatever. They don't have that control group is what I'm meaning. So if we can, I'm just going to ask Clayton if you can just bring up the laptop here, and I'm just going to start this slideshow here. So this is just one look at a reliance on vaccine-only strategy. Now, this information here is not new. It's been circulating quite a lot on socials, Telegram, Signals, any of those groups there. You would see what I'm about to show you. But I'm just bringing it back. If you have a look here, this is the New South Wales Health Department and the New South Wales respiratory surveillance reports here. Now they have the COVID-19 summary. Now you would expect ordinarily that a summary would be the key points. If you had time to read nothing else, go straight to the summary, and you would get the takeaways that you probably must know, that you should know. So what we find in this particular one here is, I'm just going to back up a little bit here, is the last part of the key summary here that makes this point here. There were 95 COVID deaths reported in the 2 weeks leading to 31st of December 2022, where of these, 16 people, or 17%, had not received 3 doses of the vaccine. Now, and then unfortunately there were 7 people that had passed that were under the age of 65 in that instance. If you click onto the report, you will see, I've got the big arrow here showing where that is. Click on the link there. You're going to come to this particular data sheet here, an extraction from the report. This is what I would suggest that most people have seen circulating on a lot of the social media sites here. And in particular, what's highlighted now down the bottom, and I'll just bring that up, is this information right here. So now, I'm sure some people have probably done a little bit of a deep dive on this, and I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm just going to break it down very briefly here. And I'm going to stay with admitted to hospital. The reason why I'm staying and picking up on that particular point there is because the messaging from mainstream media, from the state and federal government premiers, from the daily press conferences, is go and get vaccinated, because that prevents you from being it prevents you putting the strain on the health system. On the health system.
So that you and other people don't go to hospital.
It's going to stop you from getting terribly sick, and do the right thing. Don't put the extra pressures on the nurses. But when you look at this, so you're looking at 45.5% of the 1,779 people in a 2-week period 24th of December to 31st of December, that had 4 or more doses. Now, I just want to back up. I'll just come up to this point here. The reason why they mention not receive 3 doses of vaccine is because in the report they highlight the Therapeutic Goods Administration. That's their basis for what they deem the public to be vaccinated. 3 doses or more. That's why they're saying 3 doses or more. That's the significance of that. But if we come back to this, we're looking at 45.5%. We're looking at 21.2% of those 1,779 people that were admitted into hospital for COVID, not ICU, as you can see there, having 3 or more doses. 12.3%. You're looking at 0.6% for 1 dose, 0% for no dose, and then 20.5% or 364 people unknown. Now, I just want to expand. In the report, if you read the report, it explains unknown, and that is where they either have the name, date of birth, or some of those details incorrect. But I pose this question, and the question could be, when you're in hospital, do you really think that the hospital system's going to get your name, date of birth? So I'm giving the commentary here while we can see what's on the screen there, and I would suggest no. Now, it talks about all of this data comes from the Australian Immunisation Register, and there was a massive push at many of the on the socials and freedom media, on freedom rallies and the like, for people to deregister themselves from the Australian Immunisation Register before they made employment mandates, vaccine mandates for employment. So is the 364, are they people that have opted out of the immunisation? I don't know. But I'm just going to come back to this particular point here. So of course 17% have not received, which goes to say, when you look at the actual data and break it down, it's 76% of people that have been admitted into hospitalisation. Now I'm just going to fast forward this and just get forward to the main talking point here where you can compare. Sorry for brushing through on this, but here are the 3 graphs with all of the numbers. Now, the numbers, whilst they're important, each pie graph represents 1,779 people, but you can see the orange, the dark red and red in each of hospitalisations, deaths and admissions are starting at 2 dose, 3 dose, 4 dose. So you are very, very likely to at least get hospitalisation if you've had 3 or 4 or more doses. Certainly there's a near 45.5% chance, 4 doses, you get COVID, you're off to hospital.
That's right. I think we can basically state that if those who are unjabbed, the ones in green, have the least death rate, the more jabs you have, the higher the death rate will be. Just put the maths together.
For deaths, unfortunately, I've done the numbers, you know, you're talking, now it is cohort dependent, and it's particularly prevalent, I guess. The outcome for 70 years up to 90 will be dependent on, well, you can see there 4 doses, so they've pushed that quite heavily there. The outcome's not good.
That's right. As I've found, I'm also in a vaccine injury interview group with Andrew Hughes of the Bellman Report and Channel 8, and some of the stories I've been finding there are really dreadful. And there's also been another issue about batch numbers. Certain batch numbers are associated with disease, and one of the people who's yet unpublished research, she has discovered that when they do the various batches, they only test the first shipment to Australia. They don't test later shipments. And as has been explained to me by those who are in mining, etc., when they do shipments of things, you have to test every shipment. The reason is that perhaps the first lot of vaccines came by air in proper cold conditions, but the next shipment, even though it's the same batch, may have come in inferior conditions where the vaccines were warmed up and then they've been cooled again. And they should be tested each time if you're going to get these shipments. So we are being treated as lab rats. They're very careless with their treatment and manufacture and delivery of these vaccines, of these so-called vaccines.
There's been a break in the continuity standards of the way the vaccines have been
breakdown in standards everywhere, breakdown in standards of doctors who are letting themselves be censored.
So can I ask Clayton if you can just bring up, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just going to pass forward. So we've looked at that data there. Just while we're looking at this, we can't see your comments, but I'm just going to come up to this last point here. Sorry, I'll fast forward because I took it forward so that I could just get the number in my head again. Okay, now you would think, here's the future change. In that report, it says, as of the 1st of January 2023, the vaccination status of cases admitted in hospital, admitted to ICU, and those that pass will no longer be reported from January 1st. So this is the last report, 31st of December in New South Wales. Now you would think that in future changes is a significant issue that would have been highlighted in the summary, report summary.
Well, that's why they've done it, because you've already shown the facts and they can see that the facts don't fit their agenda, so they want to suppress everything. WA was a bit faster. They suppressed everything back in September. This just shows how corrupt our system is, particularly here, and that in the genocide Gladys state, where Dr. Kerryn Phelps is, they were a little bit slack, and they really actually believed the narrative put forward by genocide Gladys Berejiklian and all their bizarre health professionals and politicians there.
So in a nutshell, they can't hide the data anymore.
They can't.
The data is showing the more vaccinations you have, that we now know for some time that it's not stopping transmission.
That's right.
And the talk is that it's that it will then it moved in the narrative. It went from 99.8% efficacy to it's going to stop you getting seriously injured. You're not going to go to hospital. Do the right thing. Don't put pressure on our nurses. To the fact that the more jabs, you are actually putting pressure on the medical staff.
That's right.
And Dr. Mark, you mentioned WA. I'm just going to bring up, if we can bring up the laptop again. So you can see this is the WA health site, as Dr. Mark said, back in September 30. That's when they changed the format. They used to put it out in this format right here, and it was quite clear for you to see what the data is, and I'm just going to scroll down to right here so you can see where the mouse, hopefully those watching on the phone can still see this, but I'm bringing this up on the stream so that you can look for this data yourself. I mean, if this stream gets censored,
which it will,
I'm scratching my head with this, because these are facts and figures that are put out by the West Australian government, and you can see if you look here that talking about the number of doses, so not vaccinated, 24% were hospital admissions, but you have between 2 or more doses, second dose and first dose, so 62% of 2 or more doses. Add all that together, that's showing you exactly what New South Wales is actually stating. But if you look now, the current data, the current report is in this format here. They're not putting it in a graph or a table like they are here anymore, because these numbers here are just jumping right out. Unfortunately, it is around the cohort in this instance for this particular report and period, the cohort from 60 years to 90 plus. So I just wanted to give you some insight into that. And there we go. So we have one more, I'm just going to try and bring myself up to some of the comments, but we have one more discussion point. If Norm and Clayton are ready for that one, we are when you are. Thank you.
In trying to convince people in positions of influence to pay attention to the risks of long COVID and reinfection for people with vaccine injury, I have personally been met with obstruction and resistance to openly discuss this issue. There has been a delay in recognition of vaccine injury. partly because of underreporting, concerns about vaccine hesitancy in the context of managing a global pandemic, and needing to find the balance between risks and benefits on a population level. Reactions were said to be rare, without data to confirm how common or otherwise these reactions were. In general practice, I was seeing cases, which meant other GPs and specialists were seeing cases too. Without diagnostic tests, we have to rely largely on clinical history.
So, yeah, a lot of points to get through there. We heard in the initial package that we put together, both Channel 9 and Sky News, talking about that Dr. Kerryn Phelps has made this submission as an individual, but she has brought in, as I said at the outset, her experiences as a GP. She's seeing the cases come through the door. She's seeing colleagues that are having the cases. She's hearing it from specialists. There's still a lot of discussion around the word rare.
That's right.
And it certainly would have been, and there's many memes that go out talking about this, and it's really, I mean, I don't know whether to laugh or cry over this, and sometimes you do have to have a laugh. But if you think about it, some may actually seen, the word myocarditis. I mean, 2 years ago, unless you had you had a personal experience with that, or you had clinical knowledge of myocarditis and so on and so forth, now it's sudden adult
death syndrome. That's right.
Death syndrome.
And myocarditis has now become a normal word in conversation, and the government is trying to tell us about the signs of stroke in children. And they're trying to normalise these rare conditions and say, oh, they're normal in children. Well, strokes and myocarditis are not normal in children.
And what I put up a package the other day, just looking at some of the news headlines that were around the world, talking about, having a shower that's too cold or too hot could induce a heart attack. Drinking too much, of a particular drink. All these just absurd, ridiculous things. I mean, I read another one again last night. They said that you're more likely, if you take a certain number of breaths per minute, to A, contract COVID, B, to potentially increase your risk of heart attack.
I think the best point there to make is that we have to look at elite athletes. Normally, elite athletes worldwide, there are about 25 deaths every year. Now the number of elite athletes collapsing on the field or dying when they should be performing is now 100 a month. There's the evidence. These are elite athletes, not elderly people. They should not be getting the jab.
Yeah, and we've seen recently, there was the Buffaloes player, Demar, his surname slips my mind, a lot of speculation around that. I am building a stream on that, and I've got some footage of all this. There was a dozen reporters outside the hospital when he collapsed, and we had some discussion. We won't go into that too much, but I guess, no, we'll stick to the discussion point number 5.
Yeah.
So in particular, thanks Norm. So taking care of our guest in Dr. Mark. Plenty of good comments coming through. Thank you very much for your comments here. And I can see that some of you are appreciating the comments that and the value that Dr. Mark Lofts is adding to this much needed conversation. Of course, free to speak, because APRA can't.
That's right. I think I might point out something here, and this is from Dr. Kerryn Phelps herself.
Yep.
The absence of an honest, effective and trustworthy public health campaign has left a space for misinformation fueled by vested interests and has generated a lot of confusion, aided and abetted by many of the mainstream media. Now, that is exactly correct, but it's clear here that she's only gradually becoming awake to the deception. But the real deception lies in academia, and as a general practitioner, you're a bit removed from academia unless later on you go into the university system and end up going into this academia. That's why I warned her about this dangerous, demerited professor working under a heap of vegetables at the World Health Organization. She's got to understand, she's got to understand what's going on there and how the malfeasance is transmitted through medical academia, what I call quackademia.
So, and I just want to pick up on a comment that's coming there, just to clarify for yourself there, Andy. New South Wales hospital admissions, December 2024 to 31st, 371 died. No, it was actually 95 that actually passed. That did actually include 6 people that hadn't been vaccinated. The report does tell you that a person may have passed or been in hospital the previous week and may not have been captured at the time that the report had pushed out. So it's not 371 that passed. It was 95 that passed, and I guess that's where I'm getting the percentage. 76% of those people had the TGA standard of 3 or more, and if you include 3 or more doses. So hopefully that clarifies that particular point. Talking about again, discussion point number 5, the risks that she's mentioning with the in terms of, saying there needs to be more study in for long COVID.
That's right, and that she's been met with obstruction and resistance. Now that's very important.
Yes.
She's the most prominent general practitioner in New South Wales, and being head of the AMA, perhaps the most prominent doctor in Australia. And the fact that she is being treated like this shows how the rest of us are being treated, like mushrooms in the dark. And that's why, as she finds, she gets greater and greater understanding as to this vaccine damage issue, she's going to meet with more and more obstruction. And that's where she has to decide, where is the corruption coming from? Who are the ideologues who are peddling this corruption? Not some half-witted health minister, but where in academia this is coming from. And the delay in recognition of vaccine injury, we have to compare this to the so-called long COVID. In long COVID, which is the main study of her submission, this has basically been something that's been pushed forward by the mass media. Some people get complications from flu, and they often do when people are old, because as we understood already, it's old people that die of the flu, but this is not something that can be prevented by jabbing the people with COVID vaccines. It's already well known at nursing homes that after they jab the people for pneumococcus or various types of flu, a whole lot of the nursing home residents will die soon after. That's a well-known complication of the flu jabs, and you really wonder whether these flu jabs are of much use. But the problem with the COVID jabs, these are so much more deadly, so much more dangerous. And so I think Kerryn Phelps, what she really has to do is focus less on, I suppose, long COVID, because they yet have to define it. They yet have to make definitive tests and reliable tests for it. I mean, somebody comes in who's said they had COVID, had the flu, and they've got various symptoms. It may actually be due to something else. Perhaps they've got a lung cancer or some other condition, or they've got chronic fatigue syndrome. Because they haven't got diagnostic tests, people are just giving the label post-COVID syndrome or long COVID.
Yeah.
They're not being diagnosed correctly, and she herself has shown and admits that the proper criteria for diagnosis haven't been made. But we have the mainstream media and the crooked academics all pushing the idea that COVID is a terrible disease that will make us sick, therefore we all have to get the jab. And we have to break through this narrative, and she still has some more thinking and more discussion with other people who don't want to talk with her to find out what's going on. But the real shock for Kerryn Phelps is that when she does wake up, she won't be able to publicise it. They will be censoring her.
Well, yeah, I'd suggest she's woken up. She's definitely woken up, and that is because of she has suffered the injury herself, but more importantly and more severely in terms of the injury, she's seeing her partner, which I've mentioned before, has this. So she's definitely woken up, but what you're alluding to is she's already lost her voice. Potentially already lost her voice in terms of not literally but laterally, because mainstream media now, if she was to push for a media interview, you could pretty much guarantee as a producer of mainstream media where she's going to turn the conversation, because it's an issue that's vested, personally on two fronts, herself and her partner, and also she has the clinical knowledge to know this is what I was being told, and this is what I now know and can corroborate myself, in addition to the many GPs, in addition to my patients coming into the clinic, in addition to the specialists. And we mentioned myocarditis and the normalisation of that. And there's a comment that's come in, talking about, let's just see, damage to the heart is very different, as the muscle of the heart doesn't heal like other muscles in the body. It takes a very long time in order to heal.
That's right, because the muscle's constantly in action. I think the other thing I've got to mention here is when she talks about a national approach to reduce COVID transmission in schools to protect students, especially medically vulnerable children, I have to point out once again that flu does not kill children, and that's really a non-problem. I think the real problem is many people think that this is a genuine disease because of what has happened in Israel. In Israel, they're up to the 6th jab, and they've been more forceful in pushing the jab than any other country on earth. And this has been a real problem.
Yeah.
And you find the Palestinians who live there, the people who are not Jews, that includes Israeli Arabs, people who have Israeli citizenship but are not of the Jewish religion, the authorities there are trying not to jab the Palestinians, and the Palestinians have been screaming that they want the jabs as well, because a number of Palestinians have died from this COVID flu, as you'd expect. But the problem is that this is where the real medical malfeasance comes from. Now, I told you about Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who was a member of a minor Jewish group in upstate New York. But he described the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Naftali Bennett, he described him as a Gilgul of Joseph Mengele, the Nazi doctor. Now, the term Gilgul is a Hebrew word meaning reincarnation or a spirit manifestation. In other words, he's basically rubbishes the Israeli government as much as anyone possibly can, because he's of Jewish origin himself and is very disgusted at what Israel is doing with their own country and their own people. Basically, as Israelis get sicker and sicker, this is my prediction, they get sicker and sicker from having the jab, the government will tell them that the reason they're getting sick is because they're getting disease spread from the Palestinians towards them. And that will lead to the settlers being armed to kill off the remaining Palestinians, while these settlers and most of the Israeli population are rendered sterile by these jabs. This is the horror story we're facing in the future.
I think, and you will see there will be more that will come out in relation to that, because, well, watch this space. I'm sure this won't be the last discussion that we have with Dr. Mark on that particular, that particular
issue.
Proposition.
As long as I'm not shot the moment I get out the door.
Yeah, so, and I guess, there's many questions, and from the very outset, I certainly remember one of the first times that I heard you speaking I can't remember where it was, but, it was almost at if you could get a car park that you had some space to fit, a couple of hundred people. Look at Willagee Church. It had seating for about 300 people. Back on YouTube, I put that footage up there. I left the inside hall, went to go to the outside toilet, and the car park had 2,500 people standing in the car park, looking to wait to hear yourself, Professor Augusta Zimmerman and Judy Weilerman speak about this. In the early days, you wherever you could actually speak to say, because everybody was trying to process what was coming through. It was just crazy. I just can't believe, some of the things that I really can't, that was said back in the day, and what would get bans. So, we've covered 5 points there. Of course, there's many more. So anything that perhaps, anything else that you would like to pick up?
Yes, I'd like
to say on her submission.
That's right. I think that Dr. Kerryn Phelps is going to become very distressed, because as this continues and she finds herself censored more, she's going to have to look for groups that have also been censored and know that they're under threat. And I particularly mention police and nurses. When I went to Charles Gardner, I had a friend, she'd only had blood transfusion, she had to have it because she had a low haemoglobin. She had a stroke 3 weeks later and died. But when I was at Charlie Gardner's to see her, she was unrousable. And when I went to Charles Gardner at the time to see all the staff masked, up and all overworked. You could see the massive distress in hospitals. No friendly face. All the nurses and doctors continually worked to death by the chronic staffing shortages, which were due to the fact that nurses and doctors and any staff, if they would not get the jab, they would not get a job. It's all Harvey Weinstein mentality in the hospitals now.
Yeah.
And I also would like to point out it's even worse for the police. The police have been instructed here in WA walking into a church when the people are at service and finding people who won't wear masks, and the police, the junior police, are being bullied by the corrupted senior police to take the jab and knuckle down and impose these laws. But the police have families and they have seen their partners and friends injured by these jabs, and those at the top take no notice of them. So their life is even more stressful. And I wonder about the police in China continually having to deal with these constant lockdowns, because so many in China, the authorities among the Chinese are also corrupt. They're trying to impose this COVID lockdown and jab agenda on the people there too.
We know in Western Australia back in the very early days, Chantal Uren, who literally was bullied out of, she was very unwell, spoke out at the very beginning with a significant vaccine injury. And the last that I know, I do follow her page, she has regained some of her health, and I guess because she hasn't prescribed to the additional boosters, but nonetheless, and look what the WA Police Department did to one of their own. We've seen it in the media as well, and it's again, it's recently come up, and we've covered this. In fact, on the steps of Parliament, let me get his name, Darren from Channel 7, Darren Hitchburn, who actually had he said he had to get a vaccine injury. He had to get the vaccine in order to travel, reporting on 60 Minutes, mainstream media. As soon as he spoke out about that, he was silenced. Absolutely, as soon as
usual.
Yep. And then if he wanted to continue with his employment, he had to essentially retract that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put, we've covered the points that we wanted to cover with this, and I'm just going to give some opportunity for those watching the stream, and thank you. I can see that there's a consistent number of people watching and your comments coming through. Perhaps if you have a comment, a Q&A if you like, ask Dr. Mark one of your questions. I'll give you some time to put that up, and I will just let's talk about some of the other things that are occurring as well. So, will Dr. Kerryn Phelps be speaking more or get the opportunity to speak more on mainstream media? Well, we suspect not. Certainly, we're happy to do a live stream directly here on Freedom Media WA, and because that's. But if you think about that in itself, that it's taking platforms like this in order to get out.
That's right,
and that's why Dr. Mark has come in and given his time. Clayton's sitting here producing, Norm's behind the scenes producing. This isn't just a question of bang, go live and away you go. It takes a little bit of planning to do this. But everybody, we need to get this information out.
That's right. It's vital for children to survive. What are they trying to do? Kill the bulk of the population off? Most of the human race is dead, and only the very rich people, this is people who are the stakeholders in BlackRock and Vanguard, take over the world and turn Australia into an African game park or something.
So one of the things, I might just ask if I can bring up the laptop again. Okay, so this is Dr. Kerryn Phelps. This is her Twitter page. Now, I've been following her page ever since she spoke out, and she, as you can see there, has 75.7k followers. Now, that's certainly grown. That's grown, and unfortunately, I didn't have the screenshot to tell you the number, but it's certainly grown in the order of just shy of 10,000 in a couple of weeks. And if you start looking at some of the Twitters, these are people from all over the world now, and just look at this, long COVID farm D, that's their handle name, and some of the posts and the stats and the data that people globally are starting to send through to Dr. Kerryn Phelps and retweeting stuff that she's saying. And I'm just going to go down and try and find, there's one where she's talking about, simply that more doctors need to be brave. More doctors need to start speaking out. So it is happening, I guess, but Twitter, we know the scandals that Twitter is still coming under. We're finding that Twitter made concerted efforts to silence people. But this is all since she's spoken out. Of course, here's an article that somebody's tweeted just here, talking about this, and of course they're referring back to, this is a Perth, West Australian doctor here, and these are images. I'm just going to see if I can bring this up here and just and show, because it never. We'll close this. The West always want to try and get their little. Never surprised me how creative people can get in terms of some of the banners and posters, and unfortunately, it's not going to play the game. But John Flint, he's been Seven West Media Group. He's been at many of the freedom rallies, and he's certainly one that has been penning and pushing the term anti-vaxxers, and now he's talking about highlighting an article where this doctor, West Australian doctor, is saying he's not an anti-vaxxer. He's pushing, he has spoken about other vaccines, in the past, but he's saying with this one here, we need to press pause. If you have a look at that particular article. So I'm just going to come back to her page. Since she's spoken out, is this going to be the platform that we're talking about here? Here's another acronym, POTS. Talking now, let me just think what that was again. They're talking about pulmonary tachycardia. Tachycardia, I think it was.
Paroxysmal tachycardia after.
So doctors globally have heard Dr. Kerryn Phelps. So that suggests to me, Australia, people are looking, they are watching, and the calls don't go unanswered. We would have liked a little bit sooner rather than later. How long have we been saying in Australia, SOS, we need help? But the tweet I'm trying to follow here, find here, is where she, about 5 days afterwards, let's look at this, the impact of masks, in terms of an environmental issue right here. So interesting articles here that people are now starting to post to somebody that they're screaming for a person with the profile to stand up and really well and truly rip the Band-Aid off, so it just can't be put back on without...
Well, that's how they do it. Somebody wants to speak out, they offer them a bigger salary if they go in the back room somewhere.
So there's just a quick look at her Twitter page. Thanks, Clayton. And of course we know in Australia has a very bad history of how they treat whistleblowers.
That's right.
And
tall poppy syndrome. Yep,
tall poppy syndrome. And there we go. I'm just going to come back to some of the comments on Facebook to see if we have any there. People say, sorry, Sharon, for the scrolling, but at least you can see Dr. Kerryn Phelps. Have a look at some of the stuff that's coming up there. People are saying that they are going to share this discussion here, and we certainly hope, we always ask here, please share this stream. It's the only way that we can get the message out. We are going out on YouTube, we are going out on Rumble, we're also going out on Facebook. Who knows, we won't know till we end this stream what happens in terms of the censorship. We can only say that if we are censored, we won't get the full reason as to why, but we haven't caused any speculation here. We're not saying anything that statistically has not been said already.
That's right. I'd like to point out that people who want to go down the rabbit hole and find the deeper elite corruption, you can do no better than to go on to the research of Joseph Atwill, ATWILL. You can go onto his old website at Post Flaviana, I'll just spell it, POSTFLAVIANA, or you can go on to his current weekly broadcast with Tim Kelly called Our Interesting Times. And the particular broadcasts with Joe Atwell, which are about 60% of all the broadcasts, or podcasts I should say, they are called Powers and Principalities, taken after the term used in the Bible.
Right. And in the submission, Dr. Kerryn Phelps, I've just thought of another point here. It's something that I did want to share. She mentions her partner, Jackie, because of her injury and wanting to speak out, that she actually has launched a platform here in Australia. And I'll just ask Clayton if you wouldn't mind just going to the laptop again, and I'll try not and scroll too fast. Thank you. Okay. Now the platform Coverse. I mean, okay. I get what's trying to happen here. I really don't want to pick this apart too much. I will just say though, it's the only non-profit organisation in Australia run for people who have suffered significant adverse reaction following their COVID vaccination. This is the web platform that that Jackie Strickler Phelps, Kerryn Phelps's partner, her wife, has co-founded this platform. Of course, we know. And we're not quite there yet, but it's a massive step in the right direction. We know that there has been a number of people that have put together platforms, non-profit.
That's right, like Ruby Harris and the Australian Vaccination Network. I mean, there's a whole lot of other people, and Jackie Strickland Phelps should be contacting us and contacting them so we can pool all the vaccine injuries together, because united we are stronger.
Yeah, and I guess that explains the importance of networking, and so hopefully that, thanks. I'm just going to, and I've just wanted to pick out and just sort of say here, in terms of, where are we? News, I think it was. I'll try and drive this slowly so people don't get motion sickness. And you can talk about, here's an article penned 6th of January 2023. Coverse co-founder Jackie Strickland Phelps speaks out about a vaccine injury. That's a very interesting read in itself. If you want to find out more about her particular vaccine injury, have a read of that. The UK Daily Mail did a feature on this, unfortunately not on TV media, but on press media, online media in fact, and where unfortunately this stuff, it gets out there, but not everybody reads them. Some of them are behind paywalls, and here you can go. So you can have a look at their website, just see. The messaging starts from what we could see. I think it went back to early November.
Last year.
November last year. So obviously building on this in the background. So certainly not looking to spam it or flame it, but simply say that hopefully this is the start of an amalgamation, Australia-wide in particular, of a support network. So I think on that note there, thank you very much, Rod, for your comments, saying that you appreciate the comments that have come through, and Steve, and I guess in a large part to Dr. Mark Lofts for coming in and giving the insights. I can't really see any comments that have come up in relation to that. I am trying to just have a look. I do want to say, I've said it a couple of times as well in relation to a stream. Some people have said thank you very much for the way that it's presented and we've put this together. That's the that's the part that you see. Behind the camera, which you don't see, you have Clayton, who's come in. He's actually producing this. Norm is driving all the stuff that you see on the screen. There's a lot of pieces, as I always say, to put out a stream like that. So I guess would say thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your comments. Certainly, if you feel that this stream has been insightful, the best thing that you can do is share the stream. That's what we ask.
Unless they feel it's inciting rather than insightful.
And that so I see Clayton's just put the flash up there, asking for a $1 donation. You know, it's certainly, you can see on the, or maybe perhaps on the desks here, our previous mics weren't quite cutting it. I think we've got to the issue of what the sound volume issue is. We know it's not mics, but we were sort of, you know, invested in equipment. It wasn't quite cutting it. Not asking for much, and we're certainly not making money out of this venture. But like everybody does most things, you know, in relation to this, it's because we believe deeply enough to be able to get that in. So. People have donated in the past, pre-Christmas I put that out. Thank you very much to those people. The mics that we're using now are as a result of those donations, you know, brought in. And we don't say, I mean, you mightn't think that $1 does much, but $1 can buy, you know, a cable like these, and they do fail, and it certainly just helps things come in there. But not so much, you know, looking to push a plug for a donation, but I'm just explaining that there. Thank you again to those comments and those that have said that they've shared that. One last opportunity before we sign the stream off. If it doesn't appear as though there's any questions, I'll probably do a Hang Loose Recluse, who Nico from Hang Loose Recluse, who always goes to sign his streams off, and then somebody will come in with another comment. Kevin, thank you very much for sharing the stream. But I think on that note, we will end the stream. And so wherever you find yourself, and Dr. Mark, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you for inviting me, Lindsay.
So we hope you've enjoyed this stream. This has been another stream from the studios of Freedom Media WA. Enjoy the rest of your day.